Hey, WCA, Mike Amori. How are we? Let's look at what we did in class, or take a look at how a grandmaster handled our position. We were looking at a line from the French. After knight to c3, black plays knight f6, and we called this the classical variation, and I think you birds remember why. Because normally in the Perk or the Sicilian, the French, whenever you see a knight coming out to a natural square before a bishop, back in this position, black could have played a move like the Winawer, and that's considered to be a little bit sharper, or I don't know, it can all get sharp, but the classical players are like, let's bring the knights out before the bishops. So in the game we looked at bishop g5, bishop e7, pawn e5, attacking the knight, gaining space for white, and the knight jumps back to d7. And I want you to compare this position for a minute. You see how black has to deal with this pawn wedge on e5? And that also comes in this position, the first two moves of the French, when white on move 3 can throw that pawn out. And there are some slight differences. Black immediately strikes the center, and white, not having a knight on c3, can support that chain with a pawn. And there's a big difference. I mean, you're looking at this position as compared to this one. And you'll see that black still has the remaining pawn break, the c5 break. And here the main difference is the number of pieces that have been developed. So a similar structure, but a little bit more piece play. Okay, white to play. Their bishop is hanging on g5. It's being attacked twice. So one way for white to play is to play this really provocative move, pawn h4, that is offering a pawn to black. And you can take it. But if you take it, you have to deal with the compensation that can come. White can play queen to d3 is one idea, with a threat of checkmate on h7 if you castle. You kind of have to envision this knight hopping to h3, working with a bishop on d3. The knight on h3 can come to f4, and all of a sudden you'll have a bishop, queen, knight, and rook attacking all the light squares over here. There are pawn sacrifices sometimes. You can imagine these knights taking twice on d5, and then this e-pawn pushing forward. So black has to be really, really careful. So after the move h4, black has alternatives. They can take the bishop and go for the gambit line. They can actually castle, and it's like waving a piece of meat in front of a bull. You're telling white, look, here's my king. I can't bring a knight to its natural square to defend because of that wedge. But okay, here I am. You played pawn h4. Do you have enough development to mate me? And can you also deal with the counterplay that I'm going to get? I'm playing c5. The knight's coming to c6. So it can be a really fun gambit line. So there's another way for black to play, and that's to break immediately with the move here with c5. However, when you break with c5, you have to deal with this annoying move, bishop takes e7. What does it do? Well, it was thought that the best way to take, and maybe it is the best way to take, is to take with your king. Because if you take with your queen, like we did in the game, you have to deal with this move, knight to b5. And some of you, when I was showing you this position in class, you were putting your heads down and you're going, oh no, here we go again. Of course, here we go again. This is what we do. We try to play the craziest positions we can, get used to it in class so that when we're in tournaments, we're not afraid to take risks. You have to enjoy yourself when you play chess. We're not pros. We don't get paid for this. So let's look back here after bishop takes. The main line is to take with the king, and then the argument starts. Black tells white, okay, I misplaced my king, but you traded your dark square bishop. I already have pressure on your center, and, what's this pawn doing on h4? White is telling black, okay, your king is on e7. I may not have a dark squared bishop, but this rook may lift one of these days. This knight may hop in several different ways, and your king, is guarding that sensitive f7 pawn. You have to watch out if these white pieces get active that I don't start sacrificing something and you're going to really pay for having your king on e7. So it works both ways. But in the game, and I was looking at the game played by Simon Williams, who I put in the blog. I really like listening to him. He's a great teacher because he teaches the art of attacking play very, very well. We've been looking at Varuzhin Akobian's videos because I think Varuzhin's very good at teaching positional chess. Really, really good. I mean, about middle game planning. So what I recommend all players, different levels, do is find part of the game, whether it be the end game, the middle game, an opening, that you really enjoy, and you really enjoy the way this teacher presents the material. Simon Williams is great at teaching attacking chess. He's also very good. If he could have been a car salesman, because he's really, really good at selling you the idea of playing some of these crazy openings, because he gets so excited showing them. So, you have the name, look him up online, maybe buy some of his DVDs. I think you'll get a kick out of it, and you'll learn a lot too. So watch what he does. He takes with the queen. He invites knight b5, and then he just castles. And this is the position we had in class because it looks insane. You tell the white knight, jump in, and if you're white, you have to jump in at this point, because if you don't, why on earth did you put your knight on b5? Look at the rest of your pieces. You're leaving them undeveloped. You're letting black castle. You have to get something in return, and white does. They're coming after this big old castle in the corner. Simon played c takes d4. Are there other moves? Yes, there are. Some of you in the class played knight c6. Excellent move. Some of you also in this position played knight takes e5. Another really good move because that attacks the knight here. White is forced to take the rook in the corner. Then maybe you can play pawn takes d4. And if the queen takes, develop your knight, gaining another tempo. And as long as you can keep this knight from coming back for free, you're going to have a lot of compensation in these positions, okay? So let's take a look at what Simon Williams did in this game. So he took on d4. Of course, white goes for the rook. You have to. Again, c takes d4. If you take that pawn with the queen and you ignore the rook, then you get hit with knight to c6. And you see the problem. It not only attacks the queen, let's say she runs to d2, but now the rook has the b8 square. And once it comes there, black has all the benefits, like the lead in development, the castled king, and white has a knight on c7. This is not great. It's going to get trapped unless you get it out of there. And if you just get it out of there, you're going to lose another pawn. And this is not what white woke up to do. Trust me, this is not cool. So when Simon took in the middle, clearly his opponent took in the corner. And I apologize, I don't remember his opponent's name, but I know he was 2,600 plus. So this guy really knows what he's doing. f6. Here comes Simon Williams, always pushing, always attacking. Pawn takes on f6. And he gave a line here. If the queen had taken, and this is actually pretty good for white to do, I mean, it all works, that he was planning to take on e5. And the line he gave was queen to d2. These are all kind of natural moves. Bringing a knight in, threatening to come to e4. Let's say they stop that. And then you just put your pawn on b6. The idea, let's say white castles, is to play bishop to b7. And this should be all logical. White's going to lose the knight, so why not get something for it? And we all thought, I was actually in the chat with him when he showed this game live, and we all thought that there was a lot of compensation here for black. Because in order to break this center of blacks, how do you do that? You have to weaken your king. And if you don't weaken the center, then black's going to be able to develop around that center. You can imagine this knight on c6. You can imagine this rook maybe swinging to a8. So black is going to have a lot of play. But that's not what happened in the game because his opponent just immediately took on f6. Knight takes, some natural developing moves, and then e5. Ah, the blob. Look at that. The green blob just walking up the board, scaring everything in its way. Pawn c3. Very natural idea to break that center, and then bishop to g4. Here there was this cool little tactical idea after bishop to e2, where it looked like d3 is going to win a piece, but it doesn't, because when you take with the queen and get hit with e4, you might want to stop the video. Can you see how white avoids losing a pizza? Yep, queen e3, nice move. There's a pin here. So once they break the pin, you just move the knight and life is good. Actually, the knight will probably come to d4. That's a really good square. Okay, so instead, he chops off the knight on f3. And this is another cool moment, because if you take with the bishop, the blob changes color from dark squares to light squares. Look at that. White is a whole rook up. They're up a rook. Look at it. The knight's still here on a8. But, what is this thing where I don't even know what to call this. It looks like a less than sign, but it's getting scary. Great chess, just fantastic. So when he took here, when he took on f3, white was, or at least thought they were forced to take with the pawn. Knight c6, and once the knight in the corner was going to go, I think white was afraid of this knight here on f6 finding its way here into f4, and that would be an absolute killer on that square. So what white did, very good move, they played h5. And you can see that pawn is protected by the rook. And here Simon admitted making a mistake. He played a very good move. He takes the knight. I mean, what could be wrong with that, right? But there was better. Do you want to pause the video and see what you might play instead of taking the knight? Very good. Open the game. e4. Charge. Use the blob. Here it comes. Look at it. Push, push, push. If that pawn is taken and knight takes, you can see that black is putting an enormous amount of pressure on the white position. But he didn't do it. He played rook takes. The king got off the center line. Queen f7. And black is still doing okay here. But white now played a series of really, really good moves. The first one was h6. And those are called, well, they're either destructive sacrifices. Even if black could take this pawn for free, you probably don't want that structure, especially with the open G file. So G6 was played. But notice what that created. The pawn wedge on H6 takes away a key square from the king. So, you guys have seen these ideas before. Another good move, Rook C1, preparing to open the C file. Knight H5, we know where that knight's going, and now C4, trying to improve two pieces. The queen's coming out, the bishop's coming out, the rook's coming out. I guess that's three pieces. Knight E7, protecting the pawn, pawn takes. Maybe black should have sacrificed the pawn, but he took, and he walked into a nasty pin. Bishop to C4 puts a lot of pressure on there, so why not protect the piece? But now white is winning. Can you find a winning plan for white based on this pin? Stop the video. Ah, Fred, very good. Excellent, Fred, you got the whole thing. Rook H4. Let's remove one of the defenders. White attacks it. Black protects the pin knight. Queen B3, more pressure. And now A6. Kind of a desperate attempt to kick the bishop away from this deadly pin, but it's too late. Pause it. Excellent. Rook takes knight, game over. If you take with the queen, you lose the knight. If you move the king, the rook penetrates and you're getting smashed on that second rank. Not good. So once the rook took on f4, Simon was forced to take with the pawn, and white just takes the knight anyway. and black is in big trouble. You don't really want to move this rook off the back rank and allow rook c8 check, so you have to take with the queen. Last time, pause the video. Yeah. Crunch. What a beautiful move, huh? Rook c8. See what happens when your pieces get active? But are really... Oh, you guys see why this wins? Yeah, you can't really take the rook. If you take the rook, you lose the queen with a check. And if you take the queen... here, if you take the queen, you run into this in-between check. The king has to come to f7, and then you pick off the queen and your upper rook. All right? You guys are the best. See you on Sunday.